I'm delighted to welcome Peter Quinlivian along tonight. He describes himself as a lawyer by day and a historian by night. He's been a maritime lawyer for 30 years and for the last 14 years worked for the multinational defence contractor BAE Systems at the Williamstown Shipyard, including work on our last two ships, Adelaide and Canberra, one of which you saw today. His interest in Australian history goes back a very long way, and he says he spent his spare time in the recent COVID lockdowns looking into the history of the Alfred Graving Dock and the Williamstown Shipyard site. His talk, I understand, will cover the rich history of the Williamstown site, sometimes fraught construction of the iconic Alfred Graving Dock, and its important place in Australian history. He'll discuss the links of the site to the Victorian Colonial Navy and then the Royal Australian Navy in times of both peace and war, and its unparalleled historic importance as a centre of naval shipbuilding and sustainment. So, Peter, this promises to be a fascinating tale, and we welcome you most sincerely to talk to us.
Well, thank you all. I'm very honoured to be asked to come and speak to you, and especially honoured to be asked to do so on Anzac Day Eve, the most important day of the RSL calendar, and for many of you, one of the most significant days of the year. So it's not lost on me that this is a big day for many of you, and as I say, a great honour for me to be here. The Alfred Graving Dock and Williamstown Shipyard. Have anyone among you ever worked in the Williamstown Shipyard at any stage? Couple of hands, good. Any of you ever been on a ship that's been under work in the dockyards? Or indeed served on a ship that was built in the dockyard? It's just about everybody. So it really is a fascinating site. As Andrew said, I've worked there for the last 14 years, and during the lockdown I took the opportunity to look at the history of the site and the dockyard, so the Graving Dock in particular. And it's fair to say I got a little bit obsessed. My wife said, not another historical obsession that you use to exclude all other things you should be worrying about. You're talking about that dockyard. I dare say some of you know how that goes with obsessions and rabbit holes. But anyway, the fruits of that effort I'll share with you tonight. There's myriad stories about the Williamstown site. Fascinating, rich, funny, controversial, a great story. So if we start at the start, we'll traverse through from 1835 to 1865. Because that's the scene at Williamstown, not too long after white settlement. You can see the bark and daub huts on the shore there, and importantly the masts of the ships in the water. And that's the Williamstown story, that the access to anchorage was close, and that made Williamstown an attractive place as a destination for ships. It had that over Port Melbourne, what's now Port Melbourne on the other side, known then as Sandwich. The clue's in the name, Sandwich wasn't such a good place to try and put a ship. So anyway, Williamstown's there with a reasonably deep access point not too far off the water. So Williamstown quickly becomes, in the eyes of the Victorian powers that be, the place to set up maritime infrastructure. The harbour master of the day, Captain Ferguson, is reputed to have sidelined a contraption called a patent ship lift that was on its way to Tasmania. He sidelined it and took it to Williamstown. If that story is true, it's the first recorded case of waterfront pilferage. A long tradition starting there, perhaps. I include this for a couple of reasons. The CSS Shenandoah, a story that you may well be familiar with, a Confederate warship in the American Civil War, which hoved into the waters of Victoria one January morning and scared the daylights out of the powers that be, that a foreign warship could turn up here with no prior warning. That very fact itself set in train the need for a Victorian Colonial Navy and better Victorian defences. So that was the significance for us is the Shenandoah. It's a great story worth telling. If you haven't heard this body before, you should get somebody to tell you. It's fascinating stuff. That's the Shenandoah on the patent ship lift. This contraption, as I described, you can see there. So this thing works very well, but it's laid up out of the water to enable the ship to be worked upon by shipwrights, craftsmen, whoever, to get the ship out of the water to work underneath. A fairly primitive piece of maritime infrastructure, what Victoria had in the 1850s and 1860s. And that's the Shenandoah on board the patent slip. All we had in those days. So the recognition was fairly quickly reached that Victoria needed something more in order to attract the ships coming from the UK into Australia, primarily to get the ships to come here before they went to Sydney. So the choices are based on that. You can get a larger slipway out of the water, sort of stands on the shore, looks like that. You can get something semi-sunken in made of wood, or you can go for the Rolls-Royce solution, like an actual graving dock. And that's what a graving dock looks like, a deep, dry dock made of stone, very expensive, very time-consuming to build, but if you're building a piece of maritime infrastructure, that's the one to go for, history tells us. Now, in order to build such a thing, you need a guiding mind. And the guiding hand here was this chap, Williamstown Shipyard, who was Victoria's Inspector General of Public Works and Chief Architect. If ever there was a man of whom there should be a statue in Victoria, it's this bloke. He did the Alfred Graving Dock, he did the ANZ Gothic Bank on the corner of Collins and William Streets in town, he did Genesano College, he did Government House. Under his watch, so many significant public buildings were built in Victoria, including the Alfred Graving Dock. Slightly sad story, he was hounded out of Victoria by reason of not much more than he was a Catholic. Worse, he was a converted Catholic, so he chose to do it. The Age newspaper took a real set against him, his department and the projects he worked on, including the Alfred Graving Dock. Cost overruns were its particular bugbear. Allegations of corruption against him, which were completely unfounded, so much so that he eventually had enough and took his talents to Sydney. Sydney's gain, Victoria's loss. Anyway, that's Wardell, as I say. If you've got money to spend on the statue, so that's what he decided to do, a massive stone graving dock. A thing of real beauty if you get the chance to see it, those of you who already have. It's deep, it's long, the stones have not moved in the time since it was made. So the way a graving dock works is you can see the far end of the picture, a metal gate, for want of a better word. The word we use in the dockyard is the caisson, which is essentially French for gate. That comes out, and once that's out, obviously the water comes in and the ship is brought in. So the full process is to get the dimensions of the ship from the ship's drawings and carefully work out where the wooden blocks along the middle there should be placed. That's not just haphazardly done, that's carefully done to meet the configuration of the ship. They're put in place, the caisson is kept there, the water is then slowly let into the dock so that it fills up. The ship, the caisson is then removed, the ship's carefully brought in, lined up to rest on those blocks. The caisson's then put back in, the pump house is fired up, and the dock is drained. The water slowly goes down and the ship comes to rest on those blocks, enabling workmen to get underneath and do their thing. A 19th century solution, but still the best solution available when it comes to docking a ship. A really clever bit of industrial progress then. As I say, nothing better has come along yet. So a great system and a great bit of craftsmanship. So there's the ship on the way in, that's what it looks like when it's left high and dry, capable of working. Some of you will recognise that ship. We'll come back to it. Now, the dock itself, what you can see is only a part of what's there. So it's a massive, massive infrastructure of stone, tunnels connected to the pump house, and carefully crafted pieces. 1 million cubic tonnes of stone are reckoned to be into it. Victorian basalt bluestone, for those of you who like your rock. Locally quarried in Maidstone, Essendon, Footscray and Williamstown, and taken in there. But in order to build a gravity dock, the first thing you need is a thumping great hole. That's an image of the thumping great hole when it was first dug at Williamstown, commencing in 1865. So a major piece of public work, a major piece of public expenditure, led in 3 stages to break up the budgetary hit. That chap in the middle, he's the lead contractor, a man called John Irons, a really interesting figure. That's a shot from the quarry of the stones being cut. This is the building underway. State-of-the-art manufacturing techniques at the time. So on the top of the slide there you can see it looks like a steam engine. It's in fact what it is. It's a transporter that go both vertically and horizontally down the diagram. So a means to both shift out the muck as it was dug out, get rid of it, and also then position in the rocks and drop them into place. So really, really clever stuff. Construction was well underway in 1864, employing at any given stage about 1,000 people. So a significant piece of job creation in Victoria's history. There's another shot of the works underway. Victorian government happily spending all its money. At the end of stage 1, this picture appeared in the Argus, I think, with the bold boast that progress is going really well. Where Wardell was unlucky is that he designed the dock just at the end of the age of sail, just at the start of the age of steam, and fairly quickly realised that his dock, 400 feet in length, suddenly was not going to be quite big enough to accommodate the biggest ships that were being turned out of the shipyards in England. So the stage 1 that was complete, the innermost piece of the dock, Wardell decided it wasn't in far enough. So he took the bold decision to tear it all out, dig in a bit further and start again. So that cost a bit of time and schedule and drew a bit of criticism from the age. He decided to add another 80 feet to it, such that the overall length of the dock would be 479 feet in the old money, or about 145 metres in the new. But it's time to give our dock a name, the Alfred Graving Dock. That's Alfred, Queen Victoria's 4th child and 2nd son, the Prince Alfred. Nice enough lad, it seems. Queen Victoria wanted him out of the unhappy influence of his older brother, the later King Edward, who was causing trouble around Paris and London. So she was okay with the idea that Prince Alfred should sail to Australia in command of a ship, the Galatea. That was the first royal tour to Australia. So off goes young Alfred to the far-flung reaches of the British Empire, including ultimately Melbourne. He had a nice old time all around the country, gets to Melbourne, and one of the last tasks he had here was to lend his name to the Alfred Graving Dock. That's a scene of the great day for Williamstown in 1868, when thousands of people were invited to join the throng and see Prince Alfred do his thing with a trowel and a foundation stone. Special train was organised from Flinders Street to bring him down to Williamstown. It was a few minutes late. He arrived and duly lent his name to the dock by laying a foundation stone, of which that's a metal reproduction. There's various bits and pieces of a time capsule behind it, some coins, some newspapers of the day, etc. Still in there, hasn't been opened. The Prince was given a jewel-encrusted gold trowel to do the job with, which he duly trousered and took off onto his ship and away went. Tried to find that trowel, tracked it down to a museum in England in 1913, but the trail goes cold the trowel after that. But I haven't given up yet. I'd really like to find it and get it back to the Prince collected more than 30 trowels on that. Phenomenal. There's the actual stone that he did. It's been you can just make out the word Alfred at the top there, well weathered down the years with water and everything else, but it's still very much there. So Alfred left Williamstown after the great day. The organisers, I'm sure, were relieved that that it all went well. The organisers of events in Sydney, not so much. Alfred, to cut his long story short, went to Sydney, was the subject of attempted assassination by an Irishman who was arrested, charged, found guilty, sentenced to hang and duly hanged in a couple of weeks. So justice was swift in Sydney in those days. Victoria was able to sneer down its nose a little bit that such a thing should happen in Sydney and not Melbourne. The only problem was it was Victorian who shot him. So that's Alfred. Whenever people come to the shipyard, I always serve Mari biscuits, and there's a good story there. Alfred, later in life, married the Princess Mari of Russia, daughter of the Tsar. At the time, biscuit companies made matching biscuits, Alfred biscuits and Mari biscuits. The Mari survived, so you can still get a Mari biscuit, but you can't get an Alfred, unfortunately. So next time you're buying biscuits, just think of good old Prince Alfred. Right, back to the dock. So another piece of infrastructure, that's the caisson being built, so the gate. A huge piece of engineering done in South Melbourne. So a lot of local content in the building of the Graving Dock. Let's swing through it. Here's the dock in action. The first ship in 1874. So it took a few years to complete it after Alfred named it in 68. In 1874, the first ship in, which is the HMAS Nelson of the Colonial Navy. You can see there the people dragging it in whilst the water's in there. This one is of the ship high and dry in the water. Every record you'll find says that the first ship in was the HMAS Nelson of the Victorian Colonial Navy. Not quite true. That construction boss I showed you before, John Irons, when he completed his work, did a really cool gesture for his work. Had a little barge, put a couple of barrels of beer on it, filled the dock, and let them pot around in there drinking beer to celebrate the completion of their work. A really nice story, and I think the start of a long tradition of the shipyard. Right, so that's the Nelson in. Here's another shot of the dockyard that gives you a bit of an idea what it was like. So it's a piece of Victorian government infrastructure which the government makes available to ships coming in. The rest of it is up to the ship to organise whatever workers it needs, whatever goods and services it needs. They come to the infrastructure and the ship pays for them direct. All the government does is makes the facility available. And you can see that it's quite open. There's a low fence little gate, but that ship is in the Graving Dock, so you can walk, or you could walk right up to it and go and have a good close look, which people did. The opportunity to see large ships was a real novelty for people then, and they were a great source of attraction. Also a great source of danger. The Alfred Graving Dock is deep and steep, and if you fall into it, the prospects of survival are really very poor. A grim statistic I've accumulated is that more than 40 people have lost their life in the Alfred Graving Dock tumbling into it for a range of reasons. Sailors falling off the side of ships, workmen slipping down, drunkards walking through at night in some instances, lots of sad stories. Now that's the dock as it looked in 1874. So the government has built this infrastructure at enormous expense. It charges relatively small dues to ship owners to call here. The theory being that the infrastructure is available, it will attract the trading ships out of England to come here to get a clean and a scrape, a shaven haircut as they call it, and be on its way fairly quickly. and therefore the mail will come to Victoria first before it gets to Sydney. Economically really important. If you get the mail first, you get the news first, and you get a commercial advantage over the other city. So very important. There's the Cerberus in the dock, another Victorian Colonial Navy ship, which you know all aware. The reason I've included that, free-headed dog of course, and also you can see the pump house in the top of the corner there with the chimney stack in it. So that's where the pumps were. That building's not there anymore. The new pump house is on that spot. However, but everything else about the dock is pretty much as was then in 1874. So the dock's there, and it's used for a range of really interesting things. There are any torpedo aficionados here. I've included this because it's a really good story. That chap is Louis Brennan, boy genius in 1877. He invented the Brennan wire-guided torpedo at the young age of 22. The image at the bottom there is of one of his torpedoes. The way the wire-guided torpedo worked, as it was best explained to me in engineering for dummies, if you imagine when you pull on a cotton reel, you pull it towards you, but the cotton reel goes out the other way. That's the phenomenon of physics that makes the wire-guided torpedo work. So in those two open ports there, you can see round wheels. That's where the wires are. You have a machine on shore which pulls on the wire, causes that to spin. You've got two of them. That gives the torpedo thrust forward, and you can then regulate the amount of pull on the thing, and that can direct the torpedo. Brennan came up with that based on seeing a wood lathe, and he thought that he could use that force to drive a torpedo, put an explosive charge on the front, and you've got a formidable weapon. The first attempt to demonstrate that to the powers that be in 1877 was a bit of a flop. The thing didn't really work as Brennan hoped it would, and it didn't hit the target, fell well short, it didn't explode, it all went badly wrong. But Brennan wasn't the sort of boy genius to give up. He took it to England, and ultimately the Ministry of Defence bought the Brennan guided torpedo system, and it was deployed in Plymouth, Malta, Hong Kong, and two or three other places to presumably good effect. There's no record of it having been used in anger, which in weapons procurement's probably not a bad thing. It shows that it was a good procurement because it worked as a deterrent. So a really important thing developed at Williamstown. And there's lots of stories like that. Williamstown had a huge impact on but it's primarily a commercial vessel repair yard. I've included this for a couple of fun reasons. So this was a big one. And by the end of the 1870s, the dock isn't really going that well. It's not drawing the sort of money that the government hoped for until this one happened. The Serata was a ship that badly ran aground off Adelaide and needed 6 months of repairs. So Serata was dragged around to Williamstown. People were charged 3 pennies to go down to the bottom of the dock and have a look at the badly damaged ship. You can see them now all lined up. The ship's leaking water, and there's men, women and children walking under it. We're opening up the dockyard on Saturday to the public. You can imagine the hoops I've had to jump through to make that possible, to let people walk in behind orange safety tape. The risk assessments that I've had to fill out, the promises I've had to make, and these guys are charging 3 pennies and letting people walk underneath. Different times. Another instance in interesting risk assessment. So in 1887, a phenomenon occurred which some of you might have encountered, that when you pump the dock dry, just occasionally you get a massive haul of fish left in the bottom, flipping around. There was a particularly big one in 1887, and word passed around Williamstown that there's free fish to be had. So 300 locals turn up with baskets, bags, whatever they can muster, and they're clambering up and down the slippery bluestone of the dock and walking up with free fish. So again, not something that we'd probably do these days if there was a whole bunch of fish found involved. This one in particular, it's got a noble feel, it's a beauty. The Countess of Hopetoun was a Victorian Colonial Navy ship, not built in Australia or Victoria, but named here. This is the precise moment of the naming of the Countess of Hopetoun by the lady herself, the Governor Victoria's wife. Now, the tradition of naming a vessel with a bottle of champagne was done here, but in a pretty innovative way. The champagne was suspended at the very front of that torpedo tube on a piece of string. The good lady hit a battery cap, which set off the charge, which fired the torpedo, which smashed the bottle, and I named the ship the Countess of Hope. Again, you can see there's a couple of blokes here in the boat. There's people standing around and they're firing off live torpedoes. An extraordinary exercise. But what a show that would have been. Again, we won't be doing that on Saturday. 1892. Now, I said that the dock was 479 feet long, and the Ormuz in 1890 was exactly 479 feet long, and that's as tight a squeeze as you could get. And that's where the problem for the Alfred Graving Dock was suddenly realised. The dock just wasn't big enough to accommodate the biggest ships that were coming in. Sydney, by this stage, had built a bigger graving dock. So Victoria was losing that arms race of the commercial advantage that a large graving dock gives you. Plans were drawn up for a bigger dock to be built next to the Alfred Graving Dock in 1901, but they never went anywhere. The dock was never built. So at this stage, the graving dock falls into a little bit of the doldrums because Sydney's got its nose ahead. It's getting the better dockings, the more lucrative payments. But nonetheless, some really interesting things happened at Williamstown in this time. In 1902, the famous or infamous White Australia Policy Dictation Test had its real birth in Williamstown. So a ship had come in with a couple of Portuguese men on board. Customs and immigration officials turned up, and the law said on any plain reading of it that they were to be able to satisfy a dictation test in a European language. If they could, they'd be allowed in. The customs officials read that to mean that it was up to them to pick any European language to ask the would-be immigrant to satisfy. So I asked these Portuguese chaps if they wouldn't mind doing the dictation test in English. Their lawyer took it to court in Williamstown, said this can't be right. The Williamstown court said yes, that is right. So Williamstown had its moment there, if you like. In 1908, the US Great White Fleet turned up, an interesting precursor to AUKUS perhaps, when Australia looked to the United States as a potential great and powerful ally, invited the Great White Fleet to Australia, and some 30 ships arrived in Sydney and indeed Melbourne, were lairising in Port Phillip as foreign navies will, and of course 2 of them struck each other and needed urgent repairs in the Alfred Graving Dock, so our gift to the Americans. In 1908, the origin of the children's court. I throw this stuff in because I'm a lawyer and I like it. Some kids were caught nicking copper from the Alfred Graving Dock and taken to court in Williamstown. The powers that be decided that it wasn't a good idea to have children facing justice at the same time as some of the hardened crooks that were otherwise waiting for their turn before the magistrate. So they decided that it would be a good idea to have a separate sitting for the magistrate to deal with children's offences, which everyone thought was indeed a good idea. So out of that grew the Children's Court to exercise a separate jurisdiction because those 3 kids nicked the wire from the Alfred Graving Dock. So I'm quite proud of that one. 1909, the first, arguably the world first demonstration outboard motor occurred in the Alfred Graving Dock. There's a potential rival to that in the United States. The dates aren't clear who got there first, but I'd like to think it was Williamstown and indeed Australia. In 1912, after the Titanic, there was suddenly a significant imperative to develop life rafts. And a number of those were invented in Victoria and tested in the Alfred Graving Dock. So again, a significant contribution to world maritime matters. But as I said, the yard is in the economic doldrums, so thank goodness for the Navy. In 1910, the English government gifted Australia 2 ships to kick-start the Royal Australian Navy in a meaningful sense, the Parramatta and the Yarra. That's a picture of the 2 vessels arriving in Williamstown, the Graving Dock, in 1910. Sydney won the home porting of those 2 ships. Melbourne got the chance to welcome them first. So some consolation. I like that shot because the infrastructure is still there. You can see 4 guys standing there on the capstan at the front of the dock. That capstan's still there. So if you do come along on Saturday, please don't stand on the capstan, but you can see it's exactly as it was. A really interesting and good thing. So the Navy's here. The Victorian Colonial Navy by this point is more or less shutting up shop. The yard is considering what its future might be. The Victorian government decided that the time was right to try and build up a shipbuilding industry in Australia in order to make our own tonnage. Previously we relied on everything from the UK. So those plans are in train, 1911, 1912, until of course the First World War comes along and disrupts all plans. Williamstown was very quickly put to war service. The dockyard was used for carpenters to convert existing cargo ships to troop carriers, so beds for men to sleep in, and corrals for horses to travel in. So significant work was done in converting those commercial carriers to troop carriers at Williamstown. A number of the workshops were given over to the war reality of creating crutches, cots for hospitals, walking sticks, and various other pieces of equipment needed for the war effort. The yard itself, because it was converting troop ships, was a reserved occupation. So the men who worked there were able to get a badge saying they weren't otherwise eligible to enlist, except with special permission. Special permission was granted in many instances, and there are some interesting reports of special recruitment pushes going around the shipyard in 1914, 1915, 1916. Sort of pipe and drum bands marching around, men being asked to down their tools and fall in, and management was supporting that. And that duly happened. And, about 40 individuals who worked in the shipyard duly volunteered, and off they went. The war itself is tracking on through 1916, 1917. In 1917, the Commonwealth of Australia decided it would take on the ownership and operation of the precinct. So it was transferred, was sold more correctly, out of Victorian ownership into Commonwealth ownership, and became a Commonwealth asset for 1918. This is the slipway under construction. So the smokestack in the middle is the pump house, the gravy docks on the left-hand side, as you see. The slipway was built in 1918 to enable the construction of ships. And that kicks off Prime Minister Billy Hughes was very keen that the Commonwealth should have a commercial sort of time. So 3 ships were built in the 1919-1920. And this is a shipbuilder's worst nightmare when the launch goes wrong. The story goes that invitations were issued for the afternoon tea to dignitaries to come and celebrate the launch of the Amiga, 2:30 p.m. The old sea dogs at Williamstown said, "Oh no, you wouldn't launch a ship at 2:30, it's wind and tide. No, you'd go at 10 in the morning." Management said, "No, the invitations have already gone out, so we're going to 2:30. That's what happened." So the Amita came tearing down the slipway and slammed straight to the side of that little white ship in the front there. 15 minutes in the water and then a few months back in the Alfred Graving Dock. Not a great start for the Amita. That's shipbuilding underway at Williamstown with commercial bulk carriers. Another maritime field. The Royal Navy gifted Australia 4 J-class submarines in the 1920s in the aftermath of the First World War. Clapped out and useless would be a fair description of the J-classes. So they were taken into the Alfred Graving Dock and broken up there. Hopefully there's no AUKUS link in that. That's the J-class there.
Excuse me, they weren't all broken up there, they were stripped and went to various...
Quite right, to the dumping ground. One of them sunk adjacent to the dockyard and was there for a long time. There was a court case over the wreck removal costs of that, which Menzies, future Prime Minister, he represented the government of Victoria, to the High Court, and who should pay. 1924 was the time when the Commonwealth decided it didn't need the dockyard anymore, and it was sold back to Victoria at a significantly lower price than the Commonwealth had paid for it in 1917. So Victoria was pretty happy with that outcome. So now it's back in Victorian ownership, and fair to say, not a lot of useful stuff is happening there. Over here, Victoria. So the Great Depression's on. The dockyard's not doing a lot, but an architect was building this rather nice art moderne building in town, Hardy Brothers Jewellers, at 338 Collins Street. But he was an architect on a budget because it was the Great Depression. He really wanted a stainless steel flagpole. The best place to get a stainless steel flagpole in 1933 was at the Alfred Graving Dock, which was a salvaged periscope from one of those J-class submarines, lying there gathering dust. So he paid £35 for it, took it into town, and it's still there now. So next time you're in Collins Street, amaze your friends by saying, "Can you see the periscope on the top of the jewel?" So I went into Hardy's and told them, and they were most intrigued. They wouldn't let me go on the roof and have a look. There we go. I might try again. But it's a very cool relic still there. Right, so we'll jump through to the Second World War, and that's a shot of what the yard was kind of looking like at that stage. Not at its best, let's say, but it's come off the yard, come off the shipyard. When the nation needed it, the Williamstown shipyard absolutely met the need. In shipbuilding, the key measure is man hours worked per tonne of ship delivered per time to do it. And Williamstown's record there was as good as any shipyard in the Allied world, so United States, turned out 7 ships of the Bathurst class at that time. That's HMAS Castlemaine, the museum ship in Sea. A really good performance by the yard in that time of crisis or time of need. So that the yard is finding its place in Australian society, to put it that way, as a fabrication for the Royal Australian Navy. And there's an honour board that summarises all the ships launched at Williamstown and installed by the defence, so big ships. Probably can't read from it there, but they're on there. I'm sure you recognise me and name on there. So a really long and proud history, I would argue, kicked off for real during the Second World War, when those ships were turned out at great rate and great quality. That honour board's now in the Seaworks Museum in Williamstown, where we're making sure that a lot of the historical pieces of interest aren't gathering dust in our basement, where people can't see them. They're in seawork, so you go and see the stuff that we've got. It's very cool. So that's the war finishes, and the yard becomes a significant place for naval shipbuilding and naval maintenance. And you can see there's a number of vessels in that picture. Shot havens in the dock. There's a couple of others tied up along the piers there. It's a vibrant place. There's work sheds. There's people doing stuff. And the shipyard has come good again. HMAS Anzac, a significant large ship under construction on the slipway there in 1948, and then launched in 1948. So again, good times in Williamstown. I include this one because it's kind of fun. So the yard's always had a hot political context. During the Second World War, it was the place where the Australian Labor Party's affiliation with the Communist Party of Australia was formalised, and during the Second World War, everyone thought that's kind of okay. The Russians are on our side. So, you jump forward to 1949, however, the appetite for communism is not quite so strong. Menzies, leader of the opposition, goes down to Williamstown during the election of 1949. Brave decides to speak to the 1,000 or so ship workers. He stands on the back of the truck on Nelson Place and addresses them about the perils of communism. You can see the faces on the assembled crowd there. A bit of amusement, a bit of heckling perhaps, and a bit of downright hatred. So it didn't go that well, Mr Menzies' visit to Williamstown, but he did win the election and did hold power for the next 17 years. So, the communist thing at Williamstown was a really significant piece of the fabric there. You're aware of this incident? A really dark day, but also a day of significant heroism and bravery by people involved. So what happened here, the vendetta was launched, all going well. Sometime later was heading off for a sea trial. Something's gone terribly wrong, obviously, because instead of going one way, vendetta's gone the wrong way. It's sliced most of the way through the caisson there. So that's the view from above the dock. That's the caisson. Water's outside the dock. The really dangerous part is that there was a ship behind right inside the dock, quick match, which was had not watertight. There were people in it, on it, around it. So the first thing to do was get everybody out of there. And then some brave people went down, made quick matches watertight as they could, and a controlled flood in of water was allowed, such that the quick match wasn't completely lost and rolled. So the men who did that saved the quick match that day, and duly for it. So very, very brave in order to make the absolute best of a pretty bad day. You can see that's a quick match having been made as watertight as it could be and safely floated up again. And there's vendetta still almost slicing through the caisson. So yeah, there's misfortunes in shipyards, no doubt about that. Here's a good story. Williamstown and the Alfred Graving Dock in particular was given the honour of being the first place where the Royal Australian Navy raised the Australian White Ensign for the first time. At 8:58 on the morning of 1 March, the previous ensign, the British ensign, was drawn down, and the Australian White Ensign was put up. You can see all the white uniforms along the side there, the naval personnel watching. You may well wonder, where are all the overalls of the shipyard workers? Well, yeah, the unhappy truth is they're not there because they're on strike. There was a strike that morning, and I include that not for just flippancy, but because that was very much a feature of the Williamstown dockyard through this period. Industrial turmoil leading to probably only fairly be described as rank inefficiency in shipbuilding became the order of the day in the 1970s. We jumped through the 1970s into the 1980s. The yard faced really an existential moment in its survival. The Fraser government razor gang, we call that, looked at disposing of whatever assets weren't valuable to the Commonwealth, and the dockyard was very much framed to be potentially closed then through inefficiency and want of need, or privatised. The Fraser government was removed before the razor gang had the chance to make its final finding. The Hawke government came in. The Hawke government, with Kim Beazley in charge of defence, decided the best thing to do was to sell the yard. So it was sold with the Anzac shipbuilding contract attached to it, to a consortium known as Amacon, which bought the yard and the 10-ship contract that came with it. And that kicked off a moment of industrial reform, where the union inefficiencies that had dogged the 70s and early 80s were addressed, removed, and efficiencies came in such that a new method of shipbuilding could be seen in Australia. So the method here is to build ships in blocks, which is what we still use now, and the Anzacs was a really significant and successful period of shipbuilding at Williamstown. There's a block under construction. Amacon became Tenix, which you may well remember the name of. And there's an Anzac being launched successfully with lots of workers watching. No doubt they listened to the sea dogs and worked out the times best to launch that one. 157. Anybody who knows which ship that was? No? And there we are in 2015. The last ship that we talked about, so BAE Systems bought Tenix in 2007, and thereafter we completed the LHD ships and fabrication of blocks for the air warfare destroyers. The last ship we took into the Alfred Graving Dock was HMAS Castlemaine in 2015, which was a nice piece of symmetry. I think that a ship that was actually built there came back in for a last bit of work. We didn't realise in 2015 that would be the last ship into the Alfred Graving Dock, or perhaps more may have been made of the occasion. But there it was. So I'll jump forward now. Here's a shot I took this morning from Port Melbourne Beach. You can see Williamstown, those little white buildings right in the background there. We've got HMAS Adelaide, one of the IHDs that was finished off at Williamstown, and HMAS Sydney, one of the air warfare destroyers, the blocks for which were made at Williamstown. For me, having worked on both of those projects, to see something like that this morning is what makes me want to keep doing what I do. Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex all those years ago, but I live it and I love it. The synergy between what industry does and what the end user does, I think, is like no other industry that I could find. And to see the fruits of our labour being used for what they are designed and built for is a wonderful feeling. And many of my colleagues at BAE Systems who are ex-Navy or ex-other pieces of the ADF share that view. It's a great time. So look, I've skirted through very quickly what's an incredibly rich history, and I've got as long as you've got to ask questions.
One question is, you mentioned all the warships you had in, but you also had merchant ships in. When was the last one you had in the Graving Dock?
It was prior to the Castlemaine. We had an oil and gas Bass Strait offshore vessel in probably 14, or maybe even earlier 15. We had quite a few of those in those times.
You had our tailor then in in the dry dock in 1977 for repair after her incident in the Antarctic where she ran aground. And the dry dock there was the only one who could take us to the deep draft.
Right.
So she was in, but you had ships after. Okay.
Yeah, it did. As a commercial vessels were in until relatively recently. The dock though is 19th century sail era dimensions, so it can only really take quite small commercial ships.
Had you heard this? When the Castlemaine was dry docked in 2015, I was told that because of silt build-up on the outside of the caisson, they had trouble getting a good seal of the caisson of the graving dock. Had you heard that story?
Not specifically, but there's definitely silt build-up. But I've stood below that caisson in the last year on the inside of the dock with no want of confidence. So it holds, it definitely holds. And there's a trickle of water through, but it's ever thus. So what I would say is that when Castlemaine was in, the guys were very pleased to note that the levels were still absolutely plumb with stone. So it hasn't. There's so much stone there. The thing hasn't moved a bit in 150 years. So it's very well built.
I can tell you, I handled that project at the time, and the gate did not seat from about 9 o'clock in the morning till about 3:30 in the afternoon.
So it's a stressful day.
It was a very busy day.
Yeah.
Engineer who originally started the graving dock. Was he responsible for the port works at Warrnambool?
He consulted to Warrnambool, I think. I do remember that, but he didn't build them. So he was fired in a thing they called Black Tuesday when the Premier was running out of money and sacked all the senior public servants. So he got fired then. Stuck around in Victoria a while as a consulting engineer. And I reckon he might have done the Warrnambool thing then, but purely as a paper exercise. He didn't build anything there.
They had a steam running.
Right.
It was still there in a big shed across the facility.
Maybe so.
The pipework in the dock, presumably from the original, when was it last replaced?
The conduit out.
Well, the pipes that are used to pump the water in and out, well, sorry, it floods in gradually, it's controlled and pumped out. But the pipes within the walls of the dock, I'm talking about, presumably upstairs.
Yeah.
So, in your time, have they been replaced?
No, sir. But I'd venture they were done when the new pump house was put in, and that's 1970s. But the stone infrastructure down below, that's the water runs through stone, not other pipes. So that's still original. So at the outlet, you can see that looks like a train tunnel. That's still the original stone. But the conduits, the power and the water out, they're PVC plastics, so they're pretty recent.
How do you know how a graving dock got its name?
There's at least 4 theories. One is it looks like a grave. I don't buy. The best theory is that it's the process of graving, which is to score something off. Like the engraving is to use an engraving tool. Graving is to score off barnacles and other things on the bottom of a hull, and a graving dock is to enable the graving of the hull. Is the theory I like.
Yes, that's almost right, I think. The idea was using the method of graving to get rid of wood.
Yeah.
And it was by burning it up.
All right. So the burning theory, yeah.
Burning it, yeah. So a graving dock differs from a dry dock. because it's used for getting rid of weed.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I'm not aware of them burning it at Williamstown, but they know well in the early days, yeah.
What's its life expectancy now?
150 years and going strong. It's heritage listed, so those who own it at BAE Systems now have to abide by that. So it's kept dry, so we'll keep it dry habitually, because that's the best way to preserve the stone. You see some old docks around the world that are flooded, but that deteriorates the stone more quickly. So I would have thought with a bit of love and plenty of money, decades more to come, many decades.
With the where the polywood side is that a similar sort of construction?
Yeah, that's the Duke and Orr's dock. I think a similar idea, but a much smaller.
And she's not lined with stone, she's timber lined.
Indeed, yeah. Not the Rolls-Royce solution I talked of that we're going for. Yeah.
It's different, it's interesting to see the two different styles.
Indeed.
Peter, I remembered, I just had to do a presentation on the J-class submarine, by the way, the 6th of November. And I remember you telling me about the periscope on top of the jeweller's shop in Collins Street.
Collins Street.
Yeah, I wrote to them, they never wrote back.
Didn't they?
No, you just stirred me into action again. I'm going to see if we can get a photo of it.
They're going to think we're a really well organised ring of jewellery thieves, you know.
It has to be J-class story.
Well, I've got plenty of photos, but yeah, from down the road, but if you get one up close.
Good. Yeah. I'm slightly intrigued though about looking ahead again to the future of the dock, and indeed the future of the Castlemaine. Maintaining steel ships in the water forever is a very expensive business, and there have been proposals, I understand, that at some stage Castlemaine could be moved into the dock and kept dry, in a similar way to what they've done with Cuddy Sark, perhaps in London. Do you think that's a viable prospect?
Hard to, I mean, the dockyard, the whole precinct, is a very valuable company asset, and companies typically like an economic return on their asset. Housing a museum ship doesn't necessarily lead to a swift economic return, whereas having a working graving dock leads to some economic return. So who knows?
So is the dock still functioning?
With a bit of work and a bit of money, it could be made functioning pretty quickly. Capability is another thing. So the dockmaster, the fellow who was a dockmaster, left some years ago. We don't have a dockmaster now, so skills evaporate, don't they? So, nothing's incapable of being turned around. So I'd say.
And the lockouts are longer the same.
Correct.
Is any of the original pumping machinery still on show anywhere at a museum? Or,
There's certainly nothing at the dockyard. I'd have to check with Seaworks. I doubt it. It was built in Castlemaine, the original pump, and a great bit of Victorian effort for the time.
Could you tell us for what reason is the graving dock open this Saturday and what hours?
Yeah, so when we were doing stuff there for defence, it was like we would very seldom make it available to the public because there's stuff going on there that you don't want the public amongst for good security reasons. That ceased a couple of years ago, so we now open it up once a year as part of the Heritage Festival. And I feel a bit like Willy Wonka in that opening scene when you sort of swing out the gates and people want to charge in and see what's going on there. So we open it 1 or 2 days a year as part of the Hobson's Bay Heritage Festival. So there's tours between 10 and 4:15, I think, 2 an hour. They're ticketed, so you've got to get on the website and put your name down for a ticket. And then we go through in groups of about no more than 20 at a time to keep it controlled and orderly, and most importantly, making sure no one falls in. But get onto the website, and there's still a few tickets left. Last time I checked. Last year it was the first time we'd opened it for over a decade, I think, and 500 tickets were snapped up really quickly. So people are interested. They've always known there's something cool going on behind the gates, but never was. There are a couple of hands over there. Yeah.
Oh, I was interested in your comments about the Brennan torpedo. What was the photograph of? That's not the original one, I don't think.
It's a Brennan torpedo in a museum in Portsmouth, I reckon.
Well, I remember going, my husband took me along to, is it Chatham? Yep. To the Royal Engineers Museum, and that's where the original Brennan torpedo is, apparently. But they don't know whether it would have worked or not because they've never dared open it, apparently. And the other story about the Brennan torpedo, what was it? Oh, about Brennan. He was actually whisked off to the UK because, of course, he had developed what was a really hush-hush, weapon. And that's why he left Melbourne.
So yeah, there was a story that I got when I first worked at Williamstown. This bloke invented something so good that the Admiralty sort of snapped it up. The reality is not quite as intriguing as that. As I said, his first test fire at the dock failed. So the Victorian government now were not interested in that. So he took it to England and demonstrated it there again with I think a couple of failures and then some successes.
Well, I think he was taken, my understanding was he was taken there to develop them.
Yeah, so you got some money from Defence, but not Admiralty. They said they weren't interested.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly it was tested in secret, but he had to work really long and hard to turn a dollar out, or turn a pound out. But he did ultimately.
The role of the inventor.
Yeah, he invented lots of things, not just torpedoes. He was one of those minds, like Da Vinci.
Because, can I say, I don't know if you've ever, there was one of my husband's friends, and his name's Dennis Powell. I think he's still alive, and I think he did a master's on it at Melbourne.
On the dock?
On
torpedo, right? No. Okay.
No. They used to have great lunches and argue, discuss it.
Specialist topic, I would suggest.
Sorry?
That's a very specialised topic.
Yeah, well, my late husband became, after he left the army, the curator of arms and armour at the Museum of Victoria.
Okay.
So therefore, and he also did his thesis on the defences of Fort Phillip. So, there was this sort of little group who spent their lives discussing all these privately interesting things.
You know all about the obsessions I talked about at the start?
Oh, yeah, it's quite interesting.
One of Castlemaine's sister ships, the Whyalla, she was converted in 1947 at the dockyard to become the SS Threat, buoy tender and harbour maintenance vessel, and she operated for the Ports and Harbours Public Works Department here in Victoria from 1947 to 1994, when she was steamed back to Whyalla where she was built, and then she was subsequently towed up the slipboat she was built in, and she's on display now on Whyalla.
Yeah, on land I think, isn't it?
Correct, yes, she's out of water.
And in truth, nowhere near as impressive as the Castlemaine, though. They've just not had the funding to maintain it to the standard that Castlemaine has been.
Which is disappointing.
I was invited by the Navy to the launching of one of the ships that they built in the 80s at the Graving Dock. And they used a bottle of champagne to launch the ship, but I was told that because there'd been so many failures in previous times of launching with champagne bottles, that the way to overcome that problem and make sure that the bottle will smash on the first go is to cut a curve in the glass, and then it will always, that'll establish a weak point in the bottle and it will always break.
Yeah, there's I think it was Swan. HMAS Swan, 8 attempts or something to smash the glass. You drop one around, it's going to break every time, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, I think, is that any more questions for Peter? If not, Peter, look, on behalf of all of us, I really do appreciate Actually, I've got another question. You mentioned in your preamble, or what you were going to talk about, something about Jack the Ripper. Is there a Jack the Ripper? What's the secret there?
One of the suspects of who was Jack the Ripper is a particularly nasty piece of work. Alfred Frederick Deeming, who killed his wife in Windsor and buried her under the stones of the fireplace. Anyway, he's duly caught and hanged. So there's a theory that it was him, but they couldn't quite place him at the right places at the right time. What I found out is that he was jumping the ship in and out of Melbourne in the time, and using a bunch of aliases. So I'm halfway through running that theory to ground that we might be able to get a bit more on the Deeming Ripper theory by checking out crew manifests of when this guy with his aliases were. So there's a press report from the time when Deeming's finally caught here. A little thing in the Herald, I think, and all this stuff's now digitised. It hasn't been for many years, so better time to be a historian than ever. So that's what I'm trying to run to ground to prove that. So he was caught. He was caught because of something he did at Williamstown. He was suspected of having stolen some gold, but he didn't do that one. But he did plenty of other things.
One other question just sprang to mind when you started to get gory. When was the morgue last used inside the dockyard? There's that little stone morgue, isn't there?
Yeah, it's now on the outside.
Oh, it's outside.
It's been moved, I think.
It's not part of the document.
It's in Ann Street.
Yeah.
Is it? It's not inside the dockyard?
No,
Oh,
it was the Williamstown Mall.
oh, right.
My friend owns the Courthouse Hotel, and he said there was a tunnel going to the morgue, to his hotel.
From the wall. There's certainly tunnels, but I haven't seen that one.
Oh, that's what he told us, and he owns the house.
Is that just a way of getting rid of the drunks? Those who open.
It's tiny fisher stories.
Peter, that was fascinating. Thank you very much. I really think you've given us a great insight into the early days of the dock, the reasons for it, how it evolved, how it went through the doldrums, how it revived itself, and I'm just intrigued, frankly, at what the future might hold for the dock, because it seems it's a wonderful asset that we shouldn't ever lose. Not necessarily for military purposes, but there are lots of other vessels that need docking. But who's going to do it if the dockyard is not open in the way it needs to be?
Well, look, I think there's three good things about the site that protect that sort of future. One is the heritage listing out of the dock, so it's going to be really awkward for them to build apartments around. The second thing is that the petrochemical facility next door, you're not allowed to build certain things within 185 metres of that. So schools are out, kindergartens are out, and residential accommodation is out. So that means you can't really develop apartments in the shipyard precinct. And the third thing is that you can't grow more waterfront access. So those things, to mine, speak against anything but a maritime purpose, an industrial maritime purpose. So I hope I'm right.
Yeah. Well, time will tell. I hope we're ready to see it. Peter, thank you very much.